Okay, everybody, welcome to the program. This is the Otherppl Show, a weekly podcast featuring in-depth conversations with today's leading writers. It's a books and culture show. I'm Brad Listi, and I'm your host. I'm in Los Angeles. How's it going out there? Wherever you are, I hope you're good. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. You can follow me on Instagram and Blue Sky if you want. I have a great episode for you today. My guest is Kraus, author of a new novel called The Four Spent the Day Together. It's available from Scribner. Kraus, of course, is the author of the cult classic, I Love Dick. This is her first time on the show, and I'm very happy about that. This new novel of hers, The Four Spent the Day Together, is like a hybrid work of autofiction. It's an addiction story. But the addiction story is really about the experience of being in a relationship to an addict. So it's about the partner and that experience of trying to be in like a caregiving situation or like a love relationship with somebody who's in a self-destructive spiral. And it's also, a true crime story. Much has been made of that in the book media. This book has been getting a lot of attention. I don't know if you follow it. Maybe you've already read it, but it's really smart. It's very astute in its cultural observations. It's very contemporary and knowing, and it's fascinating and personal, and there's like a political undercurrent running through it. It's my kind of book. Again, it's called The Four Spent the Day Together by Kraus, available from Scribner. I will be in conversation with Chris in just a bit. So I went to my daughter's musical last night. She's like a theater nerd, and she's in the High School Musical. They did a performance of this musical called Urinetown. And I don't know if you've ever heard of that. I guess it was on Broadway. I think they only do musicals that have had some kind of run somewhere. I'm not super tuned in to that world, so I had never heard of Urinetown before. Many months ago when my daughter told us that they were going to be doing Urinetown, I think my first thought was like, what? And then it was like, well, why can't you just do like Grease? Do something fun where we like know the songs. But it turned out well. And Urinetown, if you're not familiar, is a musical about a kind of dystopian alternate reality in which there is a huge environmental crisis and a water shortage, and then some sort of authoritarian tyrant takes over. Stop me if you've heard this before. And you have to pay to pee, essentially. Like the proletariat are in a bad way. They can't even pee without having to pay a fee to this overlord, this oligarch, this kind of ruler person. So it's that kind of basic story architecture, and then there's some great like musical numbers, and it's just very cute and endearing and heartwarming to watch a bunch of kids put on a musical. And I should say too, they're really talented. I don't know if this is the case everywhere, that parents see these musicals that are, their high school age kids are putting on, and you're kind of blown away by how good it is. Or maybe it's just like an LA thing because there's so many performers in LA. It's like the spawn of musical people. And I say this as a non-musical person whose daughter can somehow sing a little bit. And, I don't know, neither can my wife sing at all. So it's kind of mystifying to us that she inherited or that she somehow wound up with this musical ability. But it's very sweet to see kids up on stage singing and dancing. And when it's your kid up there kind of singing her heart out and having fun, that's good. That's a good thing. And it's nice to see like your child feel good about herself. I think that's how parents kind of feel. It's like, I just want them to feel good about themselves, feel good about life. So it was a good night. And my parents were there. They got to see it. And then we all went to dinner afterwards, like a big family dinner to kind of celebrate. And we went to this Italian restaurant, and I was like, I think I'm just going to I'll get a salad, and then I'll get sides. Like I'm a vegetarian. So, and I guess I could have gotten pasta. I thought about it, But then I'm just like, what is that? It's just flour. It's going to metabolize into sugar. It's going to feel good going in, but I'm going to feel bloated. I don't usually eat pasta that much. I don't think I should do it. So I was like, I'll get the salad and then I'll get a couple of sides. So I got the salad and then I got these like fingerling potatoes and then like this rapini as like my entree. I have to believe our waitress just hated me. I think I'm among like the least beloved kind of like restaurant clientele. Some guy who comes in and orders a couple of sides as the entree. So anyway, I get this salad and it's just like a simple spring greens salad, right? Like a starter salad. And this is a relatively nice restaurant. And I get the salad and there's just a couple of things I got to say. Number one, way too much dressing. I don't know why restaurants do this. It's they don't know how to make salads. And I have this theory that it's punitive because I think, a lot of times, unless it's a vegetarian chef, non-vegetarian chefs tend to hate people who are vegetarian. So I think they might make salads with some degree of rage and carelessness. They infuse the salad with their disdain for people who don't eat meat or something. So it's always like just slathered in dressing. Dressing is meant to be minimal. You don't need that much dressing, just a little bit. I mean, I know there are people who love to just like dump it on there. I don't understand that. My wife is the same way. We're always like, can we just have light dressing? Can you just go easy? And I forgot to ask for light dressing. And so sure enough, it comes out. And then the other thing too is that it wasn't really cold. A salad should be cold. It should be crisp. It shouldn't be soggy. It shouldn't be loaded with all this dressing. And then I wasn't entirely sure if the lettuce and everything was even fresh. Like, was it kind of old? Did we get an old batch? I ate it. I didn't, I sound like I'm really picky, but like I'll eat it. I'm just like sitting there going, God, this is kind of warm. Maybe it's because the kitchen, it's just warm in there. There's burners going. I feel like there needs to be a cold area for salad prep. Salads are better when they're cold. You can chill them. You can put them in the bowl. You can prep them, put them in the refrigerator for a second, flash freeze them. I'm not saying actually freeze them. I'm just saying like make them cold and people will be happier. How have we gotten to the year 2025 and nobody knows how to make a salad? So we had a good dinner though. And now I'm up and I'm feeling good. I'm still feeling pretty good about the election. I'm kind of high from it, if I'm being honest. I'm really excited about Zoran in New York. I'm a little jealous and I'm hopeful and I want to see him do well. And I'm a little worried. And there's all this political media, the kind of post-mortem election takes that are all over the place. Everything from this is the fulcrum, this is the turning point, this is the moment when it all started to change, to don't get too cocky. Trump's going to make himself king if we're not careful. The next 3 months are critical. The Supreme Court's in on it. Stay on alert. Stay in a state of hypervigilance. Keep your cortisol levels ratcheted up. So I think like in my head, it's nice to feel good and just to have the experience of like, okay, at least there's something to hang your hat on. We've had some kind of victory. And then there's also the part of me that's like, yeah, this shit isn't going to be over until it's over. And until these weirdos are out of power, which I think is only going to happen through a concerted effort and a refusal to be denied. And I think they will try to deny. That's what I think. Maybe as soon as next year, if not next year, then certainly 2028. I just don't see these people having any interest in free and fair elections or the peaceful transfer of power. I mean, we've already seen it once. I don't anticipate it being easier this time around. So we're going to need to be active. Don't forget that I have a weekly email newsletter. You can sign up for it over at bradlisti.substack.com. I'll reach out to you once a week via email, and I'll let you know about the latest episodes of the show. I also share a list of links to things that I've been reading and finding interesting. So if that sounds good, go sign up at bradlisti.substack.com. And be sure to check out Deep Dive, my new company. It's a learning platform that creates in-depth courses for people with curious minds. The flagship course from Deep Dive is called How to Write a Novel. It's more than 50 hours long, and it features more than 40 acclaimed contemporary writers as instructors. You got to check it out over at deepdive.audio, www.deepdive.audio. And there's another course available called How to Write Autobiographical Fiction, taught by Hannah Pittard and featuring Michael Wheaton, the founder of Autofocus Books. And then the latest course from Deep Dive, imminent. It will be released imminently. It is called How to Get the Reader on Board, and it is taught by the great Steve Almond. So stay tuned for that. Again, the website is www.deepdive.audio. You can stream these courses online or via the Deep Dive app. You get lifetime access. There's a 14-day money-back guarantee. I am the host of all of the courses, so they kind of combine the best of academia. Like there's real academic rigor and thoroughness, but it also has the vitality and intimacy of a great podcast conversation. So that's what it is, www.deepdive.audio. And this episode is brought to you by Abrams Press, publisher of the novel Open Wide by Jessica Gross. It is a book about an obsessive relationship and a woman who can't help but test the boundaries of her boyfriend's love. It is a surreal and contemporary and funny book about intimacy, love, and consent. It is also the official November pick of the Otherppl book club. That is my book club. You can sign up over at otherppl.com if you want to. I'll be speaking with Jessica Gross on this podcast in the days ahead about this new novel of hers. Again, it is called Open Wide, and it is available from Abrams Press. Okay, so my guest, again, is Chris Kraus. Her new novel is called The Four Spent the Day Together, and it is available from Scribner. Chris Kraus is a writer and a critic. Her other novels include Aliens and Anorexia, I Love Dick, Torpor, and Summer of Hate. She has also published 3 books of cultural criticism. One is called Video Green, Los Angeles Art, and The Triumph of Nothingness. Another one called Where Art Belongs, and a third called Social Practices. Her novel I Love Dick was adapted for television, and she also wrote a literary biography called After Kathy Acker that was published by Semiotext and Penguin Press. Chris Kraus is a former Guggenheim Fellow, and she is a teacher. She's taught at Scripps College, and she was the writer-in-residence at ArtCenter College between 2020 and 2024. She's done a lot of magazine writing, and she has been the co-editor of the independent press Semiotext since 1990. I am very pleased to welcome Chris Kraus onto this show for the first time. We had a great conversation. I loved this book, and I hope you enjoy. All right, so here I am with Chris Kraus. And the new novel, once again, is called The Four Spent the Day Together.
Well, it wasn't the books where it began. It was the crime. I got interested in the crime, and I started thinking about writing about the crime, researching it, and writing a pretty straight-up nonfiction novel in the vein of, In Cold Blood. So the first thing I did was I went back and reread In Cold Blood. And then I read The Executioner's Song, which I hadn't read before. And they're both incredibly brilliant books and exemplars of everything that I would hope to do. But it turned out that I couldn't really do it with this book. And it changed as I got further into researching the crime. I realized that it was not going to be a whole book. It was going to be a part of a book. And that the subject was not exactly what I thought. The subject was not confined to the crime. The subject was something about a kind of sweep of American history going back to my parents' generations, because the unanswerable question is why the crime? It's completely senseless, random, a consequence of kids going around together on meth psychosis. So, the true crime genre is very old fashioned in a lot of ways. It's always searching for a motive, and that motive is, the classical noir motives of money or sexual jealousy. But in reality, there are no motives to the crimes that have taken place in the last couple of decades on the Iron Range. I talked to a homicide detective who'd been doing this for 20 years, and he said he has never had a case that did not involve methamphetamine.
Well, yeah, I think like for people listening, like just to make sure we have them on board, like to describe the crime that you became obsessed with, it was a sort of senseless murder perpetrated by these three working class teenagers who kidnapped an acquaintance of theirs and then sort of hung out with him for a while and then brutally killed him, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That was really kind of what hooked me about the crime, was the durational nature of it. There's a lot of like bang, bang crimes, just spur of the moment, shoot you dead. But the idea that they would kidnap him and spend 16, 18 hours together, I got really curious about what went on between the four of them during that time before they killed him. And the chilling thing was the victim had multiple chances to get away. But it's that case of, when we read about the Jewish Holocaust, we always think, why did they leave, right? But here we are, in what some people see as a fairly totalitarian era with threats of further totalitarianism. And you look at your life and it's like, it's very hard to leave. How do you actually really pick up and leave? Where do you find another country? What do you do with your house? What do you do for money? Leaving is not that easy. And that was the case with this crime too. He was, they were all moving around and getting high together from spot to spot. They went to like a friend or a friend of a friend's place. At one point, he was very loosely tied up in the basement of a house. And a girl came down and said, "You've got to get out now. They're going to kill you." And he didn't believe it. First of all, it was like 5 degrees outside. It was really cold. And he didn't have his coat. And then they had his car keys. So he didn't really have any transport, any way to get away from the house. And third thing was, he'd been through these kinds of scenes before where they'll kidnap you or tie you up or do something, pistol whip you to scare you and then let you go. So all of his kind of common sense experience is telling him it's not that bad. You don't have to flee. That kind of pure adrenaline flight mechanism was never switched on for him.
It's so brutal. And it makes me think too, you think about like this example of Jews in Europe, during the beginnings of the Holocaust, not leaving, though some did. It's like, not only do you have to have the means, but you might have to have the paranoia, like a certain level of, like a viewpoint that like, oh yeah, the worst could happen. I'm not waiting around to see. I'm getting out.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. And I think if you look at kind of historical catastrophes in other places, the same is true. Yes, if push came to shove, they could all leave. But as we go about our kind of routine, daily 21st century lives, the idea of like pulling up all stakes and leaving, it's very improbable.
Yeah. Yeah. So, this crime unfolded, as you said, up in the Iron Range in northern Minnesota, which is like Bob Dylan country. He's from was it Hibbing, Minnesota, I think?
Yes, he's from Hibbing, Minnesota.
Okay. And so I'm curious, like, how did you get interested in that part of the country? Like, what was going on?
It wasn't Bob Dylan. Although I've been to the Hibbing Public Library many times, and they have a little DIY Bob Dylan museum in the basement. Until very recently, the childhood home that he grew up in wasn't treated as special. It was finally bought by a Dylanologist, but it was just, on the market for $100,000 like all the other little houses there. But what brought me to the area was I started going up to the North Woods around 2008 when my then partner, the Paul Garcia character in the book, had gone back to school in Minnesota at the Hazelden Betty Ford Center, getting a master's in addiction studies. And I went along with him. And in the summer, we were in kind of suburban Minnesota. And I had a great longing to go to the North Woods. I've always been drawn to the North. My third novel, I don't know if you've read it, Torpor, that's set very much in the southern Adirondacks where I lived at one point. So I've always been drawn to these northern rural places. And I found a cabin on Craigslist to rent from a lady who no longer used it, an older lady, a retired school teacher who lived 2 states away at that point and was just looking to make sure it was secure. So I became like the renter caretaker of her very primitive cabin for like 4 summers. And I wrote at least one book there, maybe 2. I found it a very good condition for writing. At the end I was teaching, and at the end of the semester, I would just load up my car and my dog, drive for 3 or 4 days, and spend the summer there, in this beautiful wilderness area. So eventually, I wanted to be able to put my things away and be a little more comfortable. And we started looking at cabins that we could buy. And we bought a cabin about 20 miles north of the Iron Range towns that I write about. So I had, 15 years maybe of being up and around that area before I decided to write about it.
And then you read about this murder and it vexes you, like as it would, I think, any like semi-decent person. Like, how the hell does this happen? I mean, I think I feel that way about any crime that's really like hyper violent and awful, but especially when it involves young people and something just this brutal and senseless, and maybe something this collaborative. Like, they all agreed on this. I think that's part of what goes through my head. Like, nobody thought better of this. Nobody said, hey guys, like, what are we doing?
Nobody thought at all. And this kind of hallucination is depicted really well in the Larry Clark movie Bully. And he made that a long time ago, 2001. But it's the same thing. It's like a bunch of kids, 4 or 5 kids. They know each other really well. It's a friend group. They're out on a weekend night. They're all getting drunk and high together. And what starts out as this really, preposterous idea that they're going to kill one of their own, one of the kids in the group, by the end of the movie has become an accomplished fact. And you can watch the movie over and over again, and you'd never be able to pinpoint exactly where the hinge was. What was the turning point? I mean, as I got to know when I researched the books, these kids were, most of them, these are subjects of multi-generational addiction and trauma. And when things get really stressful, they just check out. There's not a lot of reasoning going on.
Yeah. I feel like crystal meth is just always, or is often at the center of a lot of these really hideous crimes. I mean, it's a particularly insidious drug and so addictive, and it leads to this kind of crazy psychosis often for people who are really in the depths of addiction.
Yes. I mean, another thing that maybe drew me to the crime was my partner, the Paul Garcia character, at that time was working in social services in those towns with exactly that kind of population, with those kinds of kids. At one point, he was working as a therapist in a juvenile detention, and they'd all been in and out of juvie. And I would pump him for stories of like who these people were that he was seeing and how they lived. And just the casual homelessness even was so shocking to me. Clients of his talking about like, they gave birth in a tent during the summer. They were, that happens a lot. People live in campgrounds during the summer, and then they drift around from place to place when the weather gets cold. Just very chaotic mode of life. She wasn't a principal person in the crime, but the character, Misty, who's Brittany's best friend and the girlfriend of the accomplice, Evan, she was in and out of foster care and group homes her entire life since she was 12. When she was 12, she came home from school and found her mother dead on the floor of an overdose. And she went to live with her grandmother for a while, but her grandma had a big crystal meth habit and things got crazy. And she eventually turned herself into social services looking for a better option.
It's just awful to consider.
Right. And then, in the course of researching the book, 2.5 years, I got to know these people as people and found it, really touching. And I kept wondering how or the people that I know, how well would we do in similar circumstances? And I doubt as well.
Yeah, it's easy from the outside looking in, especially when you're in a different social class or economic class, to be like, well, why don't these people just get out of there? And it's not that simple. It's not easy for people who are dealing with intergenerational trauma and addiction and poverty to just pack up and move to some bigger, better place with more economic opportunity. They don't have anything. They're kind of stuck.
Well, it's true. I mean, think about it. I mean, people find it so hard to empathize with what it's actually like to live, say, on a low-wage minimum job, right? To move, you have to have at least, a month's rent and a month's security deposit. You have to have a buffer of money. It takes at least $4,000 or $5,000 to move. And if you're working for $15 before tax at the Circle K gas station, how are you ever going to save that?
Right.
There's a book that I read that was so important to my research and understanding of this reality, by a geographer named Phil A. Neal. The book is called Hinterlands, and he talks about how the United States has been kind of sectored up into these different regions, not just the coastal regions. It goes more by megapolis. Megapolis being the sort of center where finance and tech and the quote unquote creative industries are. And then you move out into the suburbs, and from there into the exurbs, and from there into the near hinterlands where the warehouses and things are. And then you get to the far hinterlands. And that's the completely abandoned lands of former mining and former industries. And interestingly, he says that people move around, but only within their own bandwidth. So a hinterland person will move to another far hinterlands place, but never to a suburb, never to a megapolis. And it's just like Hunger Games, Sector 13.
Yeah.
And I found all other people that I met and talked to, they were always moving, looking for a fresh start. They'd moved from Minnesota to Wisconsin, from Wisconsin to South Dakota, but really never beyond those states.
Yeah, that tracks. And it makes me feel like, there's like this idea that sometimes gets floated around in political conversations in this country about how the difference in America is not really like red versus blue. It's like urban versus rural. And I feel like that is maybe like a more like authentic divide in terms of people's perspective and experience. People living in a place like Los Angeles often have no idea at all what life is like in a place like Wisconsin. I happen to know because I grew up there, but it's distant at this point. I probably got blind spots myself, but it's a big difference.
It's a huge difference. I mean, just the values that people have are so different, and it's so hard for people in an urban setting to understand rural values and vice versa. I mean, career is not that important in rural culture. Family is much more important.
Yeah. I mean, and you've had, you live in LA, but you've had experience up in the Iron Range in this really like hinterlandy place, if I can use that descriptor.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, like living in LA, like you come back from being up in the North Woods of Minnesota, how does your perspective on the non-hinterlands change? Like what's going on in the city?
Well, they're just two completely different realities. You can move in between the two of them, but there's really You can't even compare. They're just such different worlds.
Yeah, but you're like, the thing is I think what I'm getting at is that you're unique. I don't think very many people move between those two worlds.
Oh,
It's kind of like if you're a city person, you're a city person. And if you're a hinterland person, like you say, you don't really cross over, but you do.
why be a writer if you're not going to give yourself that mobility and freedom to move around and look at things? I mean, if you're going to be a writer, you've got to report on stuff. And that kind of, mainstream literary fiction that just reports on the state of relationships in New York and LA, it doesn't interest me very much. I've always been drawn to writing about the larger world.
Yeah, it's interesting, this book, in the way that it unfolds and the way I think that it's been described. Like when I've been reading about it, it's got this kind of prismatic quality. I mean, it's built of these sort of disparate parts and interconnected storylines. And so people, I think, sometimes see it in different ways. Like some people think of it as a true crime novel. You see it described that way. I see it more as like a relationship novel. There's an autofiction element. Like the Cat Green character is very much like your avatar. I think you're kind of open about that. And there's this relationship she has with her husband, Paul Garcia, her partner, Paul Garcia, who's struggling with addiction while studying to get, what did you say, a degree in addiction studies.
Addiction therapy.
Yeah, at Hazleton. So it's doing a lot of different things, this book is. It also deals with Kat's childhood in Connecticut, and then, the family moves to New Zealand, which I think tracks your own upbringing.
Right. Well, I mean, I wanted to look at the question of how did we get there? How did we get psychic, how did we get to this place of absolute cellular poverty that the kids are living in? How has consciousness and experience changed in America over, 3/4 of a century, really, from my parents growing up in the Bronx, which is the first part of the novel. The first part is much more about my parents' world and reality, than my own childhood, although I'm in it. And my parents were kind of aspirational working class Jewish Bronx of the mid-century. And they all left, of course, replaced by Puerto Ricans and Dominicans in the 60s. But they went to public high school, and my mother's favorite subjects were Latin and French. And that's unheard of. The kids in the Iron Range in the crime story, they don't even go to school. They've pretty much eliminated it since COVID. You can do quote unquote online school, but if your parents are getting high all day, they're not going to be monitoring that very much. So just the situation of people's lives have changed so much. In the middle part of the book, the Paul Garcia character who's struggling with addiction, he's about a decade younger than Kat and grew up in not a very privileged or educated environment. And I was really interested in comparing the frames of reference and the kind of existential reality and consciousness of people in those different demographics, from Kat's parents being such voracious readers and culture hounds, even though they didn't have any money, to Paul's situation of being very intelligent, but not really having much sense of a continuity of history or literature or culture, to the kids who really have only internet culture.
Yeah, this book is great on internet culture and cancel culture. It's very astute. I love those parts of the book. And, another thing that it kind of brought to mind for me as I was reading it is it's like a true crime book that sort of tells the story of how a writer of true crime comes to the subject matter. Usually in a work of true crime, it's just the crime and, like you say,
Right.
like an exploration of the crime itself and then trying to kind of arrive at some sort of motive. And this book is like more of a, like, how do we even get to this point? How do we get to the point where there's a woman who becomes obsessed with this horrific crime? Is that good? Are you happy with that?
Yes. Well, the middle part of the book is, once I decided that the book was going to be in 3 parts, I had to get to how does she even know about the crime, right? living in LA, you'd never know about like, a random murder that took place in northern Minnesota. So where is she when she discovers it? Where geographically and psychically, where is she? And so I make very little up in my books, it's much more a matter of selecting. But where I was in northern Minnesota. In between teaching times, it was the semester break when the crime happened. And I had just had this experience of being canceled, quote unquote, on Twitter in the wake of the success of the TV show I Love Dick. And I was very, burnt out on writing and wondering, what am I going to do next? I didn't really feel like starting another book at that point. But when I read about the crime, a seed was planted. And I thought, oh, this is really the reality of 70% of America. And we know so little about it. Maybe I can use the crime as a port of entry into that world of rural life that you're talking about.
Yeah. And, this canceling that happened, I think was an outgrowth of, like you said, the success of I Love Dick in its adaptation for television. And then I want to say there was a podcaster on, what was it, Red Scare, who found out that you owned property and like rented property and then somehow called you out as a landlord.
There were several rounds of it. She was a later round. She just reiterated it, that podcaster. I mean, the first round came from literary people in New York who worked for very A-list prestigious publications. That was the first round. And then they put up and they would take it down a week later. But meanwhile, all their followers had retweeted it and seen it. And it became this whole thing because it fell into the moment of a real housing crisis where younger people in cities who don't have apartments they've inherited or family money really are hard pressed to find anywhere they can afford to live. So this was just kind of catnip for these people. I mean, the people who originated the kind of Twitter cancellation were wealthy people, who'd gone to Ivy League schools. And the people who really kind of picked it up most fiercely were people who saw it and were in the midst of their own housing crisis.
Oh, right.
So the very fact of owning property makes you a villain. And that's very hard for me to understand. I've always been very open and transparent about how I live as a writer. I think that's like the most political thing that you can do. Actually, much more than, staking your position on various international affairs. I think really the most kind of political action is to say exactly who you are and how you live. Because people assume that if one isn't supporting oneself as an artist or writer, it has something to do with the quality of the work. And that really isn't true. It's just this tiny fraction of people are able to become self-supporting through their work in culture. Everyone else has independent means of support that they just don't talk about.
Right.
So at a very early point, I decided that I needed to create my independent means of support. And I did that by buying income property in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I write about that in my fourth novel, Summer of Hate. That's where the characters, Kat Green and Paul Garcia, meet and appear for the first time. So it becomes a kind of, failed or not, it becomes a kind of social project in buying distressed, low-income housing, trying to fix it up to a more habitable point, and leasing it to the same demographic, low-income people, without gentrifying it. And that was something that I did for many years and that Paul Garcia was involved in. But the people who were, circulating the Twitter landlord stuff, it was hard to understand where they were coming from or their idea about what the alternative would be, because not everyone can own their own home. I mean, that's a reality. I mean, and that comes from looping back to the very earliest part of our conversation about the difference between rural and urban, the huge gulfs in experience and capabilities and resources available to people. I mean, not everyone is like you. Not everyone went to Sarah Lawrence College and makes good decisions that are always in their best interests. A lot of people are not capable of owning a home, maintaining it, anything. I mean, so does that mean there should be no rental housing? Or if there should be, does that mean the government should own and manage the rental housing? How is this going to work? What are you really advocating for?
How did people even find out that you owned rental properties? You must have written about it, or?
Well, I wrote about it in Summer of Hate.
Oh, okay.
And I did an interview with Sheila Heti, a writer who I really like and admire greatly, for The Believer. And Sheila was really pressing me on this point because she thought it was useful for people of her generation to talk about, like, how do you make a living? How do you support yourself as a writer? So I was very forthcoming about, like, what I did, how it worked, how I acquired the properties, how I managed them. And that became Exhibit A. People went to that and found that in The Believer and would quote little bits of it as evidence of my landlordism.
Listen, but you come from a working class background.
Yes.
You're trying to support yourself, and you're writing literary fiction. It's like, what do people expect? Like, people have to make a living. How are you going to eat?
Right. And I mean, and just doing this brought me into contact with a demographic that urban creative people usually have no contact with at all. I was renting to people with felony backgrounds who other people wouldn't rent to, agency clients who were formerly homeless, people with, like, a lot of mental health issues in their background. I mean, this is I'd be on a panel, about to go on and speak on a panel, and getting calls about, like, leaking toilets and roofs. And I found this I like this. I like to live variously, right? I like to have contact and experience in various parts of life. So it's a way of moving further out into the world as well as a way of making a living. But I mean, there are people who read the book and think, like, the whole point of writing the book was to vindicate myself on Twitter, which is ridiculous. I mean, by the time it's in the novel, it's really a plot hinge. Where was she? How was she? What was she doing? What led her to the crime? People, I think, some of the reviewers who live in these urban places, who themselves are very Twitter involved, really gave a little bit too much weight to the Twitter part.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason I spark to it is just that it seems very astute. Like, I find social media very problematic and frustrating. I've always had kind of a contentious relationship with it, and maybe a mistrustful one. And then I'm also kind of vexed by how it works, and, like, what causes people to have currency on social while other people don't. And I don't know, the whole thing just kind of seems sort of strange and toxic to me. So I'm always interested to read anything that feels accurate in terms of the experience of it. And I've never been, at least to the best of my knowledge, I mean, I've had people push back and, like, criticize me on social media before, but I've never been, like, canceled. I've never had, like, a swarm. Knock on wood. There's still time, Chris. It could happen any day now. But I mean, like, that's a disconcerting experience to have when, like, the people come in mass. There's, like, a group of people sort of singling you out.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the bullying. And that's actually, I ended up, once I decided that I was going to do this big sweep of American history, I started to look for parallels between my character as a 12 and 13-year-old and Brittany, the girl involved in the murder, as a 12 and 13-year-old. And in many ways, we're the same person. We're the girl with her nose in a book on the school bus with a smelly tuna fish sandwich that everybody picks on. She was bullied. I was bullied. There's this through line of bullying throughout the book. It's a very American thing. The bullying on Twitter, the bullying that the kids were subjected to, the bullying even that went on in the 60s when she was in grade school. All of it. I mean, that's just so universal. And the bullying of the kids' families after the crime took place.
Yeah. And that part of the book too. Like when she's coming of age, she's kind of getting into drugs a little bit and just sort of trying to feel her way into adulthood. And then also like the home life, there's the sister character who's neurodivergent. I have a child with disabilities, so I always like notice it when there's a character in a book. I do, yeah. And whenever there's a character in a book that is, that has disabilities, or if there's I don't know, whenever it's mentioned, it very often does not appear in books, but I always notice it, and I was happy to see that in a way.
Well, that was another kind of link between the eras. I looked at my mother, how she dealt with having a special needs child, where what insurance they had at the time, Blue Cross Blue Shield, didn't cover the treatment that the child needed. The treatment was very expensive, was never properly diagnosed as autism.
Yep.
That diagnosis really hardly existed at the time. And having to somehow scrape together the means to try and save that child. The doctors wanted to declare the child severely retarded. And she really believed that that was not the truth and that there was hope for a child, and she refused to give up. And the resources and the effort that it took, both parents working full time to try and provide the help for one special needs child.
Yep.
And then we fast forward 50 years and we see the mother of the boy who did the shooting, Micah, who has 4 special needs children. She's given birth 8 times at the age of 39, and half of those children have special needs. How could you ever possibly do it?
Yeah.
And she's not a bad mother. I mean, she's an incredibly protective and passionate and good mother, but she's in an impossible situation.
She's in over her head. And I think that's maybe what I was gratified to see, is because that's my life, is trying to scrape together the resources to take care of our son and to make sure he has all the therapies we need. And like, people don't realize what caregivers go through trying to take care of a special needs child, and how much it costs, and how little real help there is. From the state, government, like there's occasionally programs, but they're a pain in the ass to navigate, and they're very unreliable in terms of their delivery. And so like the real answer, or like the easy answer, is just like get really fucking rich. If you have a lot of money and you can just pay for all this stuff, then your kid's going to have a chance. And if you don't, good luck.
I know.
That's it.
I know.
So, you understand. You saw your parents go through it, and that's a piece of the puzzle. And I cannot imagine. 4 special needs. 8 children. Period. 8 healthy children. Like, dear God.
No, I can't either. So, she was like Fagin. She was like running every little scam in the book. She was brilliant. In another time and place, she'd be running a corporation.
Right. Yeah. You get resourceful, right?
Yes.
So, this is very much a book about addiction too. A lot of the most powerful writing in this novel has to do with the relationship between Kat and Paul, and about, it depicts his descent back into addiction. He's sober, and then he kind of falls off the wagon, and, there's a really powerful sense of like realism in those parts of the book. But the thing I want to talk about is that it's really, I think, about being Kat. It's about the experience of being partner to somebody who is struggling with addiction and that illness. And like, what's that experience like? Because I think most of the time in literature, we're seeing the addict and that story depicted. We're not as often seeing the experience of the people around the addict who love and care for them and are experiencing all of this at close range. And it's, it's a very difficult thing to navigate.
It's so true. I couldn't find any books about this situation. It's such an underrepresented experience. And yet for every person struggling themselves with addiction, there's all of the people in their close orbit who are profoundly affected by it. I tried to find a therapist who specialized in working with family members of addicts. In the whole of Southern California, there was just one. in Santa Barbara, and she had a waiting list of like a year.
Yeah, and probably doesn't take insurance either, maybe,
No, well, that's a given.
Yeah.
But yeah, so as I was writing about it, I was very conscious. I mean, it's very shameful and embarrassing for the family member as much as for the addict. I was very conscious of wanting to be as accurate as I can in recording what that's like and all of the sort of crazy compromises you make with yourself. I mean, you end up, if you live alongside addiction, you end up compromising yourself out of existence. I think everybody does this. I've talked to other friends in a similar situation. You separate the person who you know and love from the addict behavior. And by separating those two things out, in a way, you're exonerating the addict behavior because you're not really focusing on what that behavior is doing to you. The addiction is so consuming and so chaotic that you can only struggle to kind of put one foot in front of the other and never really register what it's doing to you. The only way that you can feel that is to step outside the orbit of the addiction.
Yeah.
And which she finally does by divorcing him. But there's no sane place to be within the vortex of addiction.
Right. And then it's like, okay, if I leave this person, what's going to happen to them? I do care for them, deeply. And yet if I bail and they just spiral into this addiction, they're going to die. I think that's got to be part of the equation.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and especially living in LA like we do, if you tell the addict they have to get out and they're still employed, they're going to lose their job because they're not going to be able to find a place to live. There's just so many factors that kind of inhibit you doing what is ultimately revealed to be the only sane or sensible thing to do. It's funny. It's a little bit like what we were talking about in the beginning about leaving a dangerous place,
Right.
Somehow there's a lot of, impedances to that pure adrenaline rush that tells us to flee.
Yeah. It's not so simple. You can't, unless you got lots of money, you can't just pack up and go.
Right.
And usually people who are struggling with addiction aren't great, financially,
Right.
Sometimes they are. I guess they're.
It's the same thing. There's all of these variables, all of these contingencies that make what seems like a straight line, in fact, a very jagged path.
Yeah. So there's the obvious intersection of Kat's experience with Paul and his experience with substance abuse and their time in Minnesota and this crime that has a lot to do with addiction and meth. And it's this great melange, this book is, of these various storylines and the way that they're all tied together. And it's also very openly autofictional, which I also, just as a reader, that's kind of my taste. I love autofiction, and I love when I can kind of feel the writer in there. And this Kat Green character is the author of I Love Dick, which is, I think, I don't think anybody would dispute that's your most well-known book. Right?
True.
Yeah.
True.
And I got to confess, because everything that I read, really, I read for this show. And so I've never talked to you for the show. I have not read I Love Dick. I might be the only person, or at least I've never
good for you. Well, don't read it.
No, I'm going to read it. But I have not posed with it either. And, posted the photo on Instagram, which I feel like many people have done. And I think you sometimes suspect that the people who do that haven't read it either. They just want to pose with it.
Right. Well, you haven't made a Rice Krispies painting out of it, have you?
Not yet.
Someone made a Rice Krispies artwork facsimile of the cover.
Wow. I mean, that's flattering, but it's also a little strange.
She dyed all of these little pieces of Rice Krispies and recreated the cover.
Okay. I mean, that's cool. That's like sui generis, in terms of writer fandom. I don't know if I've ever seen that before. So you should be flattered. But I want to talk with you about being the author of that book and going through the experience. I mean, this is referred to in the new novel too. I mean, you're kind of referencing all of this because you've lived through it and you sort of infused Kat's character and her experiences with some of this stuff. But, the title of that book, it captures something. and it kind of took on a life of its own. It was a slow burn. Like that was not like an out of the gates cult hit. It took some time, right?
It did. I mean, it had several lives. It came out for the first time at the end of 1997. And, people in the art world in LA and New York read it because they were in it. So my target audience was 300 readers, really. And I achieved that, and people loved it or hated it. It was extremely polarizing. It had passionate defenders and complete disparagers.
And can we just, for people who have not read I Love Dick, I mean, because the title could potentially cause certain things to flower in people's minds. Like, can you just briefly describe what the book is about?
Yeah, sure. It's an epistolary novel, a series of love letters written by the character Chris, and then sometimes written by Chris and her then husband Sylvain together to a third party whose name is Dick. Sylvain is a university professor, Dick is a colleague of his, and Chris is the much younger and frustrated wife who has been making experimental films and has just finished a feature film that is bombing terribly.
And she's kind of obsessed with Dick.
Yes. So she becomes obsessed with Dick. He leads her on a little bit, gives her reason to believe, and she starts writing letters to him. And just the act of writing to Dick unleashes this will to write. And she can't stop writing to him. And the letters become essays, and the letters turn into a diary. So Dear Dick becomes Dear Diary, and somehow she becomes a writer through writing to Dick. So it's a Künstler roman in that sense.
Okay. And so, great title. You probably knew that when you...
He didn't think so.
But you knew. This is a great provocative title. The book comes out. People in the art world read it. And then how does it evolve to where it becomes this kind of like countercultural touchstone book, like a cult favorite?
Well, my friend and co-editor and Semiotext collaborator, Hedy Okeltu, had the really brilliant idea to republish it in 2006. It was a year after my third novel, Torpor, came out, and I think I was disappointed that novel didn't have a further reach into the world. So, as this kind of consolation idea, and he just had the idea to be a good time to bring out I Love Dick again. And it was a brilliant time. We were republishing a lot of Semiotext titles in larger formats as kind of, semi-classics with forwards and afterwards by contemporary writers, earlier books from the backlist. So we did that. I think Eileen Miles wrote the forward to I Love Dick. And it hit just at the right moment when there's this generation of really brilliant young women were blogging at the time. It was kind of early internet era. So people like Jackie Wang and Emily Gould and Aria Rains and maybe Sheila Heti too, they all had blogs. They were all what are Substacks now were like WordPress blogs at the time.
Right.
And they all picked up on and wrote about the book, and then their friends all read it. And that started a whole new wave of readership. And then I guess the third bump came when it was adapted for TV by Jerry Soloway and their company. And that brought it to a whole other audience of people, some of whom probably weren't even born when the book originally came out.
So it's the title, but it's also the book itself. Like, what do you think is speaking to people, especially like over time, because the book, its currency sort of increased with time. A lot of books, maybe what they're speaking to isn't necessarily as like salient as it once was, but that book seems to have some staying power. Do you have a sense of why?
Well, I think maybe the sort of self-disparaging narrator, that device has more come into its own. People were very uncomfortable with that when the book came out, could not understand it. But I think now people are more at home with, a funny, self-disparaging kind of stand-up comic type female narrator. But also the question of obsession and becoming, that's those are two universal questions. That romantic situation where one is sort of led on but not stopped. And that's the ingredient for cultivating obsession, right? If you don't say no and you give a little bit of encouragement but not full on, I mean, that's so seductive. It's so addictive. And writing one's way from one place to another place, trying to change one's circumstances and situations, get out of the role of being the precocious younger wife who is only ever a plus one into a selfhood. That's also a very universal story that a lot of people live through one way or another.
Yeah, yeah. There is a real intimacy to epistolary relationships. I mean, you talk about blogging and just like maybe just online culture, period, in whatever form it takes. I guess today it would be Substack or email, or maybe even like, Twitter or Blue Sky or someplace, or even Instagram, where people are often writing these really personal captions to their posts. But, it's a way to get to know somebody. And it's pretty reliable in my experience, meaning that, if I'm reading somebody's personal essays or their daily blog, like on the regular, and then, a couple years later, I meet that person in person, or I guess like IRL is what they would say, I'm very rarely surprised. It's usually like, oh yeah, I do know you. Like it's an accurate way, maybe even a better way in some respects to get to know somebody than to be with them in a room at the outset. Like if you get to read somebody's kind of inner life and their thoughts and feelings, I don't know.
Yeah, it's very nice because it's the texture of the voice. I mean, you do a podcast and the podcast is all about, the grain and the texture of somebody's voice. It's very, very personal and intimate. But it's the same thing with a letter. You're really hearing the person's voice at that moment in time. It's very immediate.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm curious, like so much of your work is autofictional. There are always these questions around, like, is it okay? Is there discomfort? Is it weird to kind of reveal like personal stuff about yourself, or to maybe implicate people in your life? I think I read that there's been a little bit of consternation. I think you even said a minute ago that Dick wasn't necessarily thrilled to be on the page, but I've written some autofiction. I always say I have a very fatalistic view of all of it. I'm like, I'm going to die. Like, it's going to be fine. I don't know I don't want to hurt anybody, but I'm just saying, like, I have no qualms at all about talking or writing about my experience. Like to me, it's fine. It's not.
I mean, the more personal it is, the less personal it is, paradoxically, don't you think? The more truthful and personal, the deeper you go, the more universal it gets.
That's right.
And then if you can turn it into comedy, all the better, because the darker it is, the more present the comic element is.
So with this like cycle of books, I don't know how many novels have you published now? Is it 5?
This is the 5th, yes.
Okay. So there's like a cycle. I've seen it referred to as a cycle. I don't know if that's how you would conceive of it, but I'm curious, since there is this sort of Chris avatar sort of running through the work and you're kind of openly autofictional about it all, do you have you maybe from the jump had some larger idea of the project that you're working on? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, do you have like...
Oh God, no, that would be so grandiose.
Okay.
No, I couldn't possibly. I can't think that far ahead. As I see it, the first 3 books are a trilogy. They deal with the art world, the world of critical theory and academe, the relationship between Chris and Sylvain. That's covered. As soon as I started writing I Love Dick, I knew that I had to write another 2 books to really deal with what I wanted to deal with. But then Summer of Hate, the 4th book, is a departure. And I felt like I had closed the door on those interests. And I was much more interested in kind of mass American experience. While the cultural world was still kind of aimed towards Europe and European thought, I really was interested in American politics and how people live here. So Summer of Hate was set during Bush II and the Iraq War, the invasion of Iraq, and activity around the border, which, it's not new. It was going on then too, all the immigration stuff around the border, and the incredible sadism of Sheriff Joe Arpaio in Arizona, the criminal justice system. All of that was what I was dealing with in Summer of Hate, and that kind of carries on into this book.
Yeah, I was going to say, you feel that in this book too. The kind of political backdrop to the lives that you're depicting makes me like want to talk with you a little bit about it, because things are so fucked up and chaotic in America right now. And, Dick Cheney just died. Speaking of, I don't know, I don't love Dick, but you know what I'm saying? Like,
yes,
he just died. And I always make the joke, like when I was living through the early aughts and Bush 2, Bush Cheney, I was like, well, at the time I was telling myself and others, like, I think we've hit bottom. Like, it can't get worse than this. And of course I was totally wrong.
Yeah.
And now we're, I feel like 10 years into an even darker phase.
Yes. I mean, a lot of those things were really put in place in a less, colorfully obnoxious, confrontational way. But the structure was all put in place during those years. The Patriot Act, the open surveillance, the idea of preemptive arrest, the permanent state of exception. All of those things were done then.
Yeah, these things happen in pieces.
Right.
And I always go back to the thing Karl Rove said about, like, we create our own reality. Like, I forget it. I'm going to botch it. But basically, there's no such thing as reality. Like, reality is whatever we say it is.
While you're studying it and trying to decode it and decipher it, we're going to keep going ahead and making that reality. And you're just going to live with it. And I feel like maybe Trump has, like, perverted that notion to like an extreme degree, where it's just like, just keep saying bullshit over and over and over again and never ever apologize. And we're just unmoored, but do you have hope? Or are you just like, we're fucked? Like, I'm getting out? Like, where are you at? That is one of the most disturbing parts also of, even the social media bullying of people is like, as soon as something is put out there, whether it's true or false, it's true.
Right. Yeah. People just assume the worst. And
people use language as if words have no meaning or no lasting value or repercussions. It's so nihilistic.
Yeah, there's the safety of distance, right? And maybe even like the insulation of some kind of anonymity if somebody's going by, some sort of like avatar that's not them, they don't have their own name on it. And they're just able to kind of unleash in ways that they would never unleash IRL, to people in a room. And so it creates maybe this permission structure that can get really grim.
Indeed.
But I mean, you look around, like this recent election, things sort of tipped a little bit back in the other direction. Do you have hope? Like, I'm looking around trying to get a sense for how I'm supposed to feel. I want to believe that it's going to get better, but I don't want to be naive either.
Yes, I really hope they are. I mean, the Mamdani win in New York is just thrilling.
Right.
And that just really bodes well in so many ways, I think. There has to be a proof point that, that a set of ideas are electable. And that's what Bernie Sanders came up against in 2016 and the downfall of the Democrat Party, as far as I see, in their attempts to block and sabotage him. They just could not believe that these really basically common sense and formerly moderate ideas are electable.
Right. Yeah. I saw something after Mamdani won. There was somebody on my social media feed who was like, look, I'm Canadian. Like, these kinds of politicians are a dime a dozen up here. There's nothing to be scared of, people. It's okay to have politicians who actually care about people and are trying to improve their lives. Like, the fact that we've tried, or, certain forces are trying to portray these ideas as like dangerously radical.
I really personally think that there would be a lot less gun violence in the U.S. if we had public health care. It's the absence of public health care communicates and creates this atmosphere of complete neglect, complete alienation and enemy, that there is just nothing for you. You're completely alone.
That's right. Yeah. And I was going to say too, like in a connected way, that, the scourge of drug addiction, especially in these blighted, like hinterland places where people are experiencing economic deprivation and like social structures have sort of broken down, families have broken down. There's a book that I read years ago that has always stayed with me called Methland. And it's about
that's a great book,
right?
Yes.
Because it sort of draws the socioeconomics of it all into relief, and so you understand why this is happening. And it's like, oh yeah, if you're living in the hinterlands and everybody used to have a union job and work at the factory, and they could own a home and send their kids to a decent public school, and then you fast forward 25 years and all of that is gone. And in order to make the same money they used to make, they now have to work 3 jobs. They're probably like a lot of times getting started on crystal meth just because they need to stay awake. They're trying to just like get by energetically because of what it now takes just to make a living and have health insurance and have food on the table. And I don't know, that book is instructive to me. And I think what you're saying, it's an important point. That it might not seem directly related, gun violence and health insurance, but it's all part of the fabric of how people feel about their prospects and how people feel about one another. I think there's a lot of anger and people don't know maybe where to direct it. So it sometimes gets pointed in the wrong direction, but the anger is not unjustified.
Right. Agreed.
Yeah. So I guess it's interesting times. I'm glad you're out there sort of covering it. I feel like you have a great, curious mind and you're able to, in your work, find a way to sort of weave in lots of different disparate concerns. That's got to be part of the fun of it for you, I'm imagining, is to find a way to kind of create the vessel that can hold it all.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's so much about the composition of it, deciding first, the biggest decision is what time frame is the book covering? And that predicates a lot of other decisions. Is it a day? Is it an hour? Is it 70 years? And that really tells you what kind of storytelling is going to go on in the book, what kind of composition it is. So if you're covering such a big swath of time as I do in this book, it's more episodic. It's just like a series of scenes strung together that have poetic resonance that they follow each other chronologically, but not directly. They're all grabbed from a bigger timeline and put alongside each other because of the way that they kind of subliminally inform each other.
And I feel like the reception for this book, it feels like this, I'm kind of a pretty careful observer of all of this because of what I do, but like this is a book that got a good amount of attention in the press, like the book press. You have to be pleased at this stage of your career that it feels like maybe there are new readers coming to your work and that your body of work is maybe being appreciated in a way that I think writers would obviously hope for. Like, are you feeling that?
Oh, I'm very pleased. I was having dinner with some close friends last night and we were talking about that. I mean, they said, this is the best place you've ever been in at this amount of time after book comes out. And I couldn't agree more. I mean, I feel like everything that I hoped for is happening. My biggest hope for the book was to reach a wider audience than I normally do. So when people texted me after hearing it in their car radios on NPR driving home from work, that was great. That was exactly what I hoped for with the book, because the themes of the book are so universal, addiction and family history, bullying, poverty, American violence. These are things that I really don't want to just talk about among my like-minded group of friends in LA and New York. I really want to talk with a lot of people about them.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I mean, the fact, like, you don't see very many books that are set in the Iron Range. At least I don't, like you said earlier, it's a lot about relationships in literary fiction. It's about relationships in LA and New York.
I mean, if a book is set in some other place, I'm automatically interested in it. Central Florida, Idaho, whatever. I really want to read about other places.
I'm the same way. I want to read about other countries. Like when I read, I always tell myself I need to do more work in translation. It can be a little trickier to talk with an author, depending on their level of fluency. Like to do like a podcast interview can be a bit of a trick, but when it happens, like I just talked to Vincenzo Latronico, the Italian author. I don't know if you read his book, Perfection, but I think you would dig it.
That's a wonderful book.
Yeah, we had a great talk, and he has this fabulous like Italian accent, and it's just nice to be in Berlin or wherever, just somewhere else.
Yeah. It's
a delight to meet you and to talk with you. And I always end by asking my guests if they're working on anything else. It's fine if you're not, but I'm just curious if there's another book in the pipeline or if you have some sort of vision for what the next project might be.
I am. I started writing it this summer, and it's called Closing, and it's going to be a short book that's part fiction and part nonfiction, kind of a hybrid book, and I'm doing it for Duke University Press for their Practices series. And as soon as all these kinds of things slow down a little bit, I really need to dive back into that book.
Any hints as to what it's about? It's called Closing?
Oh, yes. It's about a late friend who I promised to write about, who had an incredible career as a maverick lawyer and local politician and campaign runner, and kind of the sort of shift in his life between the late 20th century and then the 21st. As in this novel, things kind of change, and pretty much for the worst over these years. Goes from a very kind of idealistic, aspirational kind of American democratic place to a much darker point of, addiction and, general despair.
All right. Well, I will be there for it. And I really thank you for taking the time to talk with me. I know you've been doing lots of interviews. Congratulations on all that you've achieved. And I wish you well with all that comes next.
Thank you so much. It was really good to talk to you too.
Okay, everybody, there we have it. That was me talking with Chris Kraus. Great conversation. She is delightful. The new novel is called The Four Spent the Day Together, and it is available from Scribner. You can follow Chris Kraus on Instagram. Check that out, and be sure to read her new book. Again, it is called The Four Spent the Day Together. It's excellent. Don't forget to subscribe to this show wherever you listen to this show. Hit the subscribe button, and you can follow me on Blue Sky and Instagram. You can sign up for my newsletter over at bradlisti.substack.com. And if you are a regular listener, if you love this show and if you get something from it, I hope you will support it over at patreon.com/otherpplpod. Patreon.com/otherpplpod. If you want to join my book club or get an Other People t-shirt, you can do all of that at otherppl.com. If you want to sign up for a deep dive course, go get How to Write a Novel or How to Write Autobiographical Fiction, or coming soon, How to Get the Reader on Board. You can get those things over at www.deepdive.audio. And finally, if you have a moment to spare, I hope you will rate and review this program wherever you listen. So if it's Apple Podcasts or Overcast, wherever you listen, give it a rating, write a little review. It helps the show algorithmically. It helps it find new listeners. Okay, so coming up on Thursday, I should be back with Mira Gonzalez for a brand new episode of Brad and Mira for the Culture, this podcast's weekly pop culture digest. So I think that does it for this episode. Thank you again for being here. I appreciate it. And Mira and I will be back on Thursday. All right?